I have a question. Why does everyone argue about what is or isn't a simulator? I find this argument to be kind of stupid, to be brutally honest, because for the last decade or so, all racing games have focused solely on how the cars drive and not everything else that makes racing the sport and spectacle that it actually is. So, I don't know how any game can call itself a simulator of motorsport when it genuinely isn't. For example, in 2008, when Race Driver Grid released, it was considered a simulator by the vast majority of the public. And it wasn't because of how the cars drove, because, let's be honest, they all drive like fighter jets in this game. It was because of the atmosphere and the authenticity of the grids and the tracks that were selected for the specific cars that were being raced. Nothing was realistic about how the cars drove in Race Driver Grid, but everything else was, and that authenticity made it extremely addicting and very realistic to somebody who's just playing the game. Now, if you were to play a more modern racing game, like Project Cars 3, for example, it's the exact opposite. The atmosphere of the environment is entirely gone, and in its place is a very, very realistic driving model in the sense of it's simulating a car and not some sort of jet boat racer like you see in Grid. Even a AAA game like Forza Motorsports, which goes out of its way with these beautiful cinematics before a multiplayer race, fails in this regard because the track itself looks extremely sterile. When there's a crash, cars don't knock debris off of each other. There is no life. It looks like a game, despite being extremely realistic and the graphics being drop dead beautiful. It's almost like in a sport as violent and chaotic as motor racing often is, it's like the world itself is just too perfect for what is actually happening in front of you. And I don't know any other way to try to explain this to somebody. I get the feeling like almost everyone understands what I'm talking about, but it all comes back to one word. They wrap all of these emotions into one word that has been used to group so many different games together that it has almost lost its meaning. And that word is Simcade. When the word Simcade first came into use, it was primarily to promote a game that had realistic physics that had been toned down a little so the game could be played on a controller. Think Need for Speed Shift, Shift 2, Project Cars 3, games of that sort. Today, however, Simcade has become a sort of catch all term for anything that doesn't seem like or the community doesn't approve of as a simulation. For example, there are people who will claim that Project Cars is not a simulator solely because it released on console. It can be played with a controller, therefore it's not a simulator, which is fucking stupid. Similarly, there are people who will claim Automobilista 2 is not a simulator because the cars slide too much, despite having the best moment-to-moment gameplay of any of the games I've used footage for in this video. It's these weird disagreements that cause a lot of riffraff within the sim racing community, and generally speaking, is what has kept us focused on car handling versus the rest of the package for the last decade. So, I guess my point with this short video is just stop worrying about if your game is a super hyper incredible simulation. It doesn't really matter as long as it's fun. But moving forward, we need to get back to the point where we have things like dynamic crowds, dynamic marshals. We have music in the background where concerts are playing, off the surface of the track, but we can still hear them as we're going by. We need whistles in the pit lanes and all the things that a lot of these old games used to have, but for whatever reason we have moved away from today in pursuit of perfecting and absolutely nailing down the physics, which quite frankly I think we've done. All of these games drive not exactly the same, but close enough that you can tell the difference between an open wheeler or a GT car. It just takes a few minutes of practice to get used to any of these games to where you can drive effectively and have fun. And that, I think, is the key to this whole conversation. People need to quit criticizing Simcade this, Arcade that, and they just need to start having fun again. They need to go back and play games like Grid, like Need for Speed Shift 2, and remind themselves, hey, it's okay to be a little bit less serious some of the time. Not every single racing game has to be this incredibly hardcore experience, because that opens the door for someone to create a game like Race Driver Grid, which was an incredibly cinematic experience. It feels visceral, it feels real, even though the cars drive like cocaine fueled lunatics. It doesn't take that much to create a very similar experience, a very similar effect in a game like Assetto Corsa.